Alright guys, so welcome back. So I think today I'm gonna talk a bit about this topic of prayer. Just mainly because I'm starting to get back into it, and it's kind of one of those things, I'd say for my own self, I've almost always had like a pretty difficult time praying. But even when I was a kid, even for like, a teen, for like, I don't know, I want to say years, I didn't have too much of an issue with like reading the Bible. I was able to just kind of read the Bible, almost every night, I'd read it, I'd study it, and on Sabbath, I'd study even more, and I do a whole like Friday night thing, and I really valued that time. And then, Saturday too, like after church and stuff, probably sometime before Genesis and before other stuff like that, before grad school and all that, I used to participate, I used to like keep the Sabbath, and I always struggled praying, and I think it's hard for me to pray at night, like right before bed, but that seems to be the time when I'm likely to pray. Same with maybe in the morning, like when I first wake up, because I don't really have the energy there. I think this is the only year that I can recall where, like 2021 or even end of 2020, like during the middle of the day, I had some sermons on from, and I was doing that during work, and like doing communion during work and things like that. And I'd say since I started this new job, so I think my start date was May 27th of 2020. Since I began this new job, I basically noticed that the job is less stress, and the first job I ever had was pretty stressful, because I was working at like it was technically considered almost like an outpatient crisis center. And so to have that as my starting point, and like having a job where it's like, well, it's not going to get much harder than that. So, but it really did impact me. Like, I feel like it aged me. It kind of made me easily overwhelmed. I get anxiety. I get, I've had like some months now though. We're going on like 9 months or so that I've been out of that job. And I can't count. Wait. No, it's not 9 months. Is it? Let me see. It's like 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah. 9 months would be like the end of this month. So, yeah, it's just, I'm noticing that I'm kind of like less stressed. But there are some themes that I noticed that I kind of always struggled with. Like I was saying, like prayer was always something that was always hard for me, to do. Even when I was a kid, I was able to kind of read the Bible, study about Hebrew and like Jewish culture and like that kind of stuff. I never really had much of an issue going to church, sitting through church. I found it interesting, the learning part. I got involved in like teaching lessons in Sabbath school, and like during like Vespers and stuff like that too. Like I was pretty involved, and I liked it. I liked that I got to learn about all this stuff that it was like you can never really fully know the end or the answer to things. But I'd say 2020-ish, maybe 2020 and 2021, I'm tampering with things more. Like, that's probably the first time that I've started to try to apply things more practically. And I don't mean like, okay, read a passage and try to apply it in my life like that, but more like on the spiritual end. Not I feel like before I was more like concentrated on like the social end of things, kind of like and the intellectual. So social and intellectual, but so I feel like I have a good base, a good background. I'm not like completely not knowledgeable about scriptures and traditions and culture and history and things like that, regarding the religion of Christianity and other related religions, and I would say that sometime during like maybe grad school, I kind of stopped like practicing Christianity, and it was a conscious decision. I just remember, I can't remember exactly when it was, but I remember, I want to say just before that, I remember getting really into astronomy and like reading, I think it was like Astronomy Today or one of those like magazines you could pick up at like Barnes and Noble or whatever. It was an astronomy magazine, and I bought one because I was just like, let me just geek out on like stars and the universe and stuff. And something about that, I started reading it and I was like this universe is so big that it kind of, something about it kind of made me question God, like question like the existence of God and everything that I kind of like was taught and learned and sought out to kind of like educate myself on. I kind of just stopped, like almost like dead in my tracks, just kind of like was like, I don't know if I think this is real anymore. And I just kind of actively remember telling, like kind of internally telling myself like, okay, I'm not going to really read the Bible or pray anymore or really like go to church too actively. So I remember when I first moved from LA to San Diego, I like the first year I still went back almost every single weekend. From what I remember, I went back almost every single weekend to LA, and went to church and hung out with my church friends and did that like every weekend. So it was like Friday night I would drive up, I'd stay, church was on Saturday. Sunday I would I don't know what I did on Sunday. Drove back. And I remember doing like this therapy. We did like mock therapy with like we did mock therapy sessions for like an introductory like therapy class, where you're kind of like learning how to practice therapy. And that was the first introduction I ever had to therapy, outside of like church stuff, where it was kind of more like religious based or like spiritual connection kind of based, like community, spiritual connectedness type of stuff. Like it wasn't that anymore. But yeah, I got pretty involved with the, I don't know, I wasn't really involved in anything actually. Like I studied, I went to school, but like 3 years into it, I feel like it was kind of like I wasn't able to really manage anything. I didn't really have like the Sabbath anymore that was kind of keeping me like grounded, because that was usually like a 24-hour period where I was no longer studying at all, like almost without fail. Like all my years I'd never really worked or studied on the Sabbath. So Friday sundown to Saturday sundown, I was just like chilling. And even if I was going to church, I remember before I would leave after church and never hang out, because it was like at sundown, like, let's go, I gotta go study. And I would study all Saturday night, almost every single Saturday night, and Sundays too. Like pre-grad school, I hardly ever really went out that much during college, like especially during my bachelor years. I was really pretty hardcore dedicated student. And then once I got into grad school for a doctorate program, that's when I kind of stopped doing anything that had to do with spirituality whatsoever. And I was gaining a lot, because I made a lot of great friends. I met a lot of people who were into not so much religion, but they were really into like positive relationships, like healthy kind of like relationships. And I saw that, like, and I liked it. And I was like, well, this is different from the church people that I was always around, because those people where there was a lot of like backstabbing and gossiping and a lot of just like, it wasn't like all the people, it wasn't like 100% of the people, but it was really hard to know like who do you trust, and it's like I grew up in that church, so I was there long enough to see people come and go. So it wasn't like I was coming in there new and I was like, oh, like I don't know who's who. Like I saw from the people I grew up with from like age 5 and on, like how people were kind of interacting with each other, kind of their take on, what's socially acceptable and things like that. And then I didn't really like it, but I was part of, those social dynamics. And I was always like, it just never set well with me. I was like, I wish that there were more authentic relationships. I wish that things were a little bit more, real and honest and kind of like open communication. And then when I stopped being involved with the religion and stopped being involved with those social circles and started being way involved with a very secular environment, not secular to say, it's just like scientific, not secular to say like, I'm not implying that it was like evil people, because I know sometimes people use that term to mean that, oh, we're gonna say secular because they're not religious, it's like evil or something. I don't mean to imply that in any way. I just mean secular to say that, we talked about science, we talked about social sciences, we talked about statistics, sometimes we might talk about philosophy, and there was a big value placed on different cultural backgrounds, and with that comes like religious and spiritual, you kind of like understandings and backgrounds and things like that. So I was kind of connected in that way, but it was kind of interesting to me that I was like seeing more, like I was starting to see way more about kind of what I wanted to see that I had never really seen too much at the church. Now, the church I went to that was in Westchester that merged in with Hawthorne Church into Torrance, in the city of Torrance, and then they stay now kind of near the Redondo Beach, Torrance kind of border near the pier, and they're like kind of like off Torrance Boulevard, but yeah, that was the church I grew up in, and they bounced buildings a few times and merged a few times, but I saw the negative stuff and I saw the positive stuff too. And mind you, I hung out with these people almost every day for like most of my life, from like age 5 all the way to like 10th grade. There were so many people that I would see weekdays for school, Saturday weekend for church, Sunday for sports league. I would see these people all the time. So, it's not like I didn't know them, or not like we didn't interact or we didn't know each other, but I felt like it wasn't really possible to like develop too many like close relationships. Like it was like they're close, but it was kind of like a friend mentioned this once. So on the same topic, a friend kind of mentioned this once, that like they went to a church and like, they start talking about like asking people like, hey, what do you want to like share about or talk about, or what's on your mind? And then they shared something that was like pretty deep. It wasn't like a surface level, like, oh, let's like pray for like healing in the world, or let's like, please bless me at work or something like that. It wasn't like a surface level type of thing that they were talking about. They were kind of talking about some deeper topic, and they could kind of tell by the energy in the room that people were kind of like put off by it, or that they were kind of like judgmental about it, and kind of like it wasn't like socially acceptable in that circle to be talking about like serious actual topics. And so that's kind of how I would explain it too. It's kind of like I remember there being for example, that there was a like a young couples group, like a young married couples counseling kind of Sabbath school class, that they were like, when we first moved into the building, they were trying to figure out like who's going to share what rooms, because there might not be enough rooms for everybody. So how are we going to like organize which groups? Because it was mostly by age group or topic, like type of like topics that they had the Sabbath school groups arranged kind of like you would with school. It was either like by subject or, kind of like cohort kind of thing. And so once you get to be like a certain age, like college age, you're no longer like cradle roll. You're no longer like primaries. You're not juniors. You're not, you might be collegiate, or, you're no longer youth. You're no longer like the high school teen group. But there was never really anything for the collegiate group. So you kind of were like, usually that's the age people just left church anyways, in their 20s. And so they just would stop going. A lot of them would go to religious schools. So they would just stop going. And, it was fine that they stopped going, and they were kind of just more like interested in, kind of, how would I explain this? Like, they stopped going to the church at that age, and there was nothing for them. But then, if you did stay, you were kind of forced to choose like a group. Like, do you just not go to Sabbath school, which was like before church? Do you just not go and then wait for the service to start when there's like the praise team music and all that, and then after the sermon just like go home? Like, do you just like not interact and not socialize because there's nobody your age group, and just kind of hang out with the married couples, hang out with the people with kids, with with like older kind of adults, like the elderly group? Or do you hang out with like your friends that aren't in the church but outside of church? Or do you hang out with people who don't go to that church at all, who are like more either other churches or secular, culture of people? Or, do you hang out with the younger crowd? So it's kind of like that age range between your 20s and up until when you get married. There were usually like people that you would just, that it was just like an age where people would just never be there until, they started making things like Genesis and other types of services, and they purposely made it at like 3:00 so that people could go after church, and the people from like the Inland Empire could like drive out to LA, because most churches ended at like 12 or 1 or so, and then they could drive out. They could get there around like 3 or so, 3:30 or so, and then the service would end maybe 5, and then they'd have like a dinner as their potluck around like 5:30, 6ish, and then a lot of us would just stay and hang out, because it was like, well, now it's Saturday night, and if you weren't studying, you would just kind of just go out. So when I was not studying, I would go out, and so that was nice. But there was still this issue, that the church I grew up with, the church I grew up in, was really kind of not very open-minded. They were more open-minded because it's LA. So like LA Adventist churches are way more open-minded. Like they even eat meat, which is like almost unheard of. Like growing up, it wasn't a thing, but I think near my college days, it started becoming more common that you'd see people, actually pastors and things, like taking their churches out to like lunch and potluck at like Soup Plantation, and like people paying for food and paying for meals on the Sabbath, and people like having certain food choices like meats and stuff at all, like in public, because a lot of people ate meat, but a lot of people mostly kind of hid it, and like you would almost never really eat meat like at church. Like it wasn't like a thing. Like even if it was like, okay, we're gonna go to like a picnic and everyone bring your own lunch, people wouldn't have like chicken or whatever. I think one of the first times I ever saw chicken was when there was a potluck, and there was a new kind of teen pastor who came in. She was her kids were like teens, but she was like their mom, and she was the pastor, and she came in and she was like, contributing to the potluck. She brought like one of those KFC buckets of chicken. And I remember like the line was so long, and people were like, there's KFC. And some people were like kind of saying it like in a judgmental way, I'm pretty sure, because it was like, it was a very taboo thing. And then before I even got through the line, before I even got to the chicken was gone. So it's like two things like you would see. It's like people eat the stuff, but then it's kind of like a taboo thing, but it's like a lot of people ate meat. Like, there were more meat eating people than there were like vegans and vegetarians. But, you know, the culture kind of talks a lot about like vegetarianism because of Ellen G. White and all the cultural beliefs and things about like meat and health and all the big health message that comes with Adventism. So there was that. So I basically waited until kind of maybe more recently. So but I would say that I really experienced how great that Genesis Church was, because I was like, well, these people are a little bit different. We can kind of like have like genuine conversations and stuff, and there's like, you know, there's like a trust factor. Like, it wasn't like you tell somebody one thing and then the next thing you know, like, you walk into your room and you're like, how does everybody know this? You know, like, it wasn't like that. And so it was a little more of like a safer kind of environment, but still it was a little tiny bit gossipy. But, you know, we had some interactions where it was like, you know, people were really kind of doing their best. I could tell it wasn't like people were just like dropping the ball and not even trying. But for me, that was the hugest turn off to church, was just that, was just like that people were just like not really like easy to interact with. And so I just didn't see it as worth my time anymore. I was just like, there's no reason to like spend my energy on all this. So there was that. There was, so that was like when there was so I went from that age range, early 20s, into like my early 30s, into, you know, when I was like in San Diego. And, you know, I stopped kind of like participating in the religion. I tried when I first moved to San Diego, and I was like, man, these churches are like a step back from the LA churches even. Like, it was like, man, I feel like we're going back to like 1980 something, like with the way people were like, you know, they were reading from like the Sabbath School quarterlies, and it was very just like stiff as a board kind of thing. It was like very traditional. It wasn't really my style. The food was amazing. They always had, they merged with like a Korean Adventist church, or a church that, I think it was a Korean Adventist church. So they had a Korean service and an English service, but the Korean people always cooked, and it was like legit Korean food. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, this is like amazing. And so honestly, I only really went because I was like, I had nothing better to do, because it was before I really knew people in San Diego. So the weekends when I would stay in San Diego, I would go to that church thinking, okay, I'm going to meet people, and this is going to be just like it was in LA, and this is just going to be the people I know are going to be the church people, and then the school people I don't really interact with too much. But that didn't really happen. I didn't really like the church too much. It wasn't really worth my energy to drive. It was all the way up like Ted Williams or something, like 20, maybe like 20, 25, 30-ish minutes away from the house. That wasn't really worth driving there just to like go. But I like the food. And I met someone else who was Adventist in San Diego that, you know, that person was not very pleasant. So my experience moving to another city made it kind of harder in a way, because I mostly was used to socializing through like the church. And so, not that I didn't socialize with people, because in grad school I socialized with people too, but it was like I was still kind of like practicing a religion that's very like different from like mainstream culture. So I wasn't going out on Friday nights too much. And if I did make an exception because it was like a birthday or something special, you know, because that was the first time when I started like prioritizing like my friends and other stuff over like church and like religious traditions and things. So I remember I remember my friend Luz and some other friends were, you know, they had birthdays and things, and, you know, everyone celebrates on like a Friday night or whatever, and I was still studying on like Saturday nights. And so I only really had Friday nights off. And then, so, and usually I would spend it doing like church related stuff. And so, when I didn't have to do that anymore, or when I kind of fell away from like doing it and wasn't really interested in doing it anymore, I kind of started like hanging out more with my grad school friends in LA, and I got to know them really well. I started kind of going on dates and doing stuff that was like not really Friday night type of things that you would do, going out to maybe a club or a bar on occasion, eating things that had pork in it. Like there were a lot of things that I had never really done, but the main reason was because I was with a religion of people that never did it either. So it was kind of like, it's not that I never like tasted bacon or anything, but it was like, it wasn't like a part of like my life. It was just like I would actively avoid it unless like somebody happened to put it in and it was just going to be like too wasteful, like throw out whatever the meal was or whatever. I wasn't going to like throw a fit if like I ordered split pea soup and it has like little pieces of ham in it. I'm not going to be like, how dare you, but and like throw it away or something. But like I would probably pick them out or like something like that. Like I would just actively go out of my way to like not eat it or not order. Like I would always ask certain burgers, does it have like pork or bacon, certain things like McDonald's breakfast sandwiches. I wouldn't eat the ones, I'd order it without any sausages, no bacon, no nothing. I never really ate pork. Ramen, the same, I wouldn't really eat the ramen. I wouldn't really eat shrimp. I ate ramen, but and I know the broth is pork, but it was kind of more, for me, that was kind of more of a cultural thing, because where I lived in Torrance, there's such a heavy Japanese influence. It was just kind of odd to like not eat ramen. Like it was just kind of one of those things. And on occasion, like shrimp or like crab, like if it was in like a California roll, stuff like that, where it's just like, to me, it was kind of like a cultural thing. It was like, and I grew up in like, it was kind of like a subcultural thing. Like I'm not Japanese, but I mean I grew up around like a lot of Japanese influence, and so certain things you just kind of I just did it just because it was like that's just how I'm doing things. But I did try to like avoid it too. Like I would maybe not eat like the chashu pork pieces, or like like I'd take off if it was something I could like avoid eating, I would avoid it. And kind of the same with the Sabbath, it was like I kept the Sabbath unless it was like, like I was saying, I make exceptions for like special people in my life that didn't really keep the Sabbath, only later in life, only like during grad school and things like that, when I started realizing like, hey, I value these people, and I feel like pushing them off isn't really making our relationship stronger, or never hanging out with anybody on a Friday night when I'm trying to get to know these people. It's hard to do when I don't really ever hang out with them. And that seemed to be the night everyone would want to go out, more so than Saturday night. And I was used to going out Saturday nights, so there was that. And then, yeah, so after that, I kind of fell away from everything pretty much, and then started kind of getting more into the relationships I had with the people who were completely outside of that church. And then anytime they would learn about it was mostly from me. I would tell them about, and I kind of like kept it mostly to myself. Like I would say I was raised in like a Christian denomination, things like that. But I mean, a lot of people who aren't raised in Adventism don't really understand that it's not like other denominations of Christianity. It's kind of its own thing. Like life, even like I explained, like food choices are pretty, dictated by the religion. Kind of the days you go out, the places you go out to, like theaters, bars, clubs, things like that. You don't really go to like movies, bars, and clubs and stuff like that. Like, you can do a lot of sports and stuff like that, but it's like weekends you don't really do the same types of activities either. So just all that together is, just in general, like I would say it's very I would say it's very similar to mainstream Christianity in that, there are a lot of kind of like Jewish cultural kind of traditions that get brought up into that denomination more so than others, unless you're thinking like Messianic Jewish churches. Those are the only ones that are really like, they really practice like Jewish traditions and they believe in Jesus, versus, Adventists, they practice the Sabbath, and just by default of not really having a tradition of eating meat, they just by default don't eat certain like biblically unclean meats. So if you are going to eat meat as an Adventist, you usually don't eat traditionally. If you were practicing, you wouldn't really eat those types of foods. And some people take it like a pretty far distance, and some people are just kind of casual about it, like, if it has a piece of bacon, I'm not gonna like roll my eyes or anything. But I mean, I'm not gonna like throw out a full-on burger. But some people would. They would be like, I'm throwing this whole thing away, I'm gonna complain to the manager, or like, they're gonna like make a fuss over it. Or there's a funny YouTube video, you should look it up. It's called Bad Adventist. I don't know if it's called Badventist or Bad Adventist, but it's like Bad Adventist or something like that, or Adventist Alert. It's like a fake, funny comedy skit about an app where it's like, this app it will tell you that Adventists are nearby. So if you're doing anything that's not acceptable, then it'll alert you so you can change your behaviors and not get like caught. So I'll just spoil it. Basically it shows like, it's on the Sabbath and the kids are like at home by themselves playing like with trading cards, like baseball cards or whatever. And then the mom comes back into the room or into the house, and then like they're playing with like these cards that are like, people who are like, Adventists, like prophets or Adventists, like figures that like, had a lot of writings or a lot of history in the church. So, it was like you're playing with like biblical cards versus like, and like religious cards versus like sports, or like there's one where they, the pizza comes and then, it has like bacon and ham or like some sorts of pork on it and stuff like that. And then, it comes to the table and there happens to be another Adventist that joined this main character at the table. And, the waiter saying like, oh yeah, like here's your pizza. And then they're like, I didn't order that. And then they're like, yeah, you did. Remember you told me just put as much meat or as much sausage as is humanly possible or something like that. And then they're like, well, you could avoid this if you had Adventist Alert. So it was kind of like, just because you have the app, it's supposed to help you to kind of avoid those kind of things. But it's just that's just kind of how it is, in all honesty. It's a funny example that like that is a thing in Adventism, that like there's a lot of judgment around like not keeping the traditions, and a lot of the traditions aren't even really biblical traditions. It's just people aren't keeping the traditions. And so because they don't want to. And a lot of it's not like necessarily like biblical. So there are a lot of things that are backed by either the Bible or by Ellen G. White writings. But I'd say to that extent, if you're not following all the Ellen G. White writings, like the Desire of Ages, the stuff in there about the history and the, there's like added information, like it's like devotionals that are like added information that you don't find in the Bible, but it's like considered like historical information that was given to Ellen G. White by God, that was, just thought-provoking additional information. So everybody who's Adventist would say it doesn't necessarily matter if you would consider Ellen G. White a prophet or not, but she is one of the founders of the church, and she herself, as well as every Adventist, would say, never put any of her writings or her books above the Bible, And if you don't even like touch her books or don't even read them or don't learn from them or anything, then okay, that's okay. Like, you're not gonna like be necessarily like condemned or anything if you like don't want to read it, but it's just part of the traditions that, according to the tradition, she was given these prophetic visions and wrote, and she was like at a young age there was some kind of mischievous kid who like hit her in the head with a rock, and so she basically was ill because of that. There were some sickness issues that she had that like she couldn't really do a lot of things that the other kids could do. I couldn't remember exactly what it was, but there are some things where they say like some scientists would say that she was like, maybe she had like catatonic kind of episodes, and then some other people would say no, like it wasn't catatonia, it was, like it was part of like when God would give her visions, or something like that, like she would write. And so there was something different about like, I don't know if it was because of the rock hitting her in the head that she wasn't really able to write or speak properly, or whatever it was that she wasn't able to do properly. The writings that you see coming from her are way beyond what they should have been, as far as like intellect, and as far as like, grammar, as far as like everything there. And there were some times where they said, at least once, that she was like, there was like a gigantic, like, huge, like back then, like in the 1800s or so, these books that were like Bibles, they were Bible books, but they were like way thicker than the thin ones we have now. Like, it was like one of those huge, thick, giant, heavy ones that she was holding out on her arm for like, I don't know how long, for quite a lengthy amount of time, to the point where people said that, like, she's a prophet, and like there's no way that these things would be happening other than if God was giving her these kind of like gifts and visions and strength and like all these kind of things. But she herself was also saying like, you don't have to follow me, you don't have to listen to me. But the information that she wrote about, most of it was, the focus of most of it was like healthy lifestyle, healthy living. So books like The Adventist Home, they talk about like, like reasons why it is preferred to live in the country versus the city, like the psychological, emotional benefits of living in one environment versus the other, or eating certain foods versus not eating certain foods, or keeping the Sabbath versus not keeping the Sabbath. Like a lot of things that are almost proven too scientifically that it does promote a better lifestyle. And they do say that Adventist Americans in general tend to live 7 years longer because of the health choices that they have as a whole. So I'm not going to say every Adventist is super healthy, because that's not the truth. I mean, just because you're eating veggie meat doesn't mean that it's healthier than the meat that's in the stores and, some good meats and stuff. So, Adventists, they have their own brands and products by Loma Linda and things like that. So yeah, so there's that. And then, so that's basically how Adventism is different from mainstream, if you say like non-denominational Christians who worship on Sundays, go to church on Sundays rather, not that you can't worship on a Sunday, but it's kind of interesting. Like I've said this before, that like Adventists would you almost never see Adventists going to church on Easter Sunday, just because it's so traditional to not go to church on Sunday. So usually, even for Easter, Adventists might celebrate Easter and practice things at home, but they technically don't have church services on Sundays. From what I know, it's not traditional to really have them. There might be church services that are done, but most Adventist churches don't do that. So there's that. There's also, so in addition to the, I guess the church, and the actual Adventist church beliefs, I would say that the only similar type of denominations I would say would be like maybe Seventh-day Baptists And then if you want to take it like the super conservative route, maybe groups like Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses are kind of similar, almost because they kind of have separate books and separate writings and separate teachings and traditions that Adventists don't really keep, that nobody else really keeps. So Adventists have Ellen G. White's writings, and there is also kind of like, a theory that goes around that that Adventists writings weren't written by Ellen G. White, and it was John or James or whatever her husband or whoever that guy is. It was him who wrote it instead. Now I wasn't raised way too much with, knowing about Ellen G. White. In our household, we had books, we had the Desire of Ages that I got for my baptism. I think we had another older copy in the house. We had The Great Controversy in the house. That's the book that's cool. It's about, it talks a lot about like the life of Lucifer, like before he came to earth. So like the turmoil that he caused in heaven, that, where there were like the fallen angels that came. So that book, if you want something exciting to read, the Great Controversy is a pretty cool book. I think we also have Patriarchs and Prophets. We had the Adventist Home that I didn't start reading till like later. The Adventist Home almost reminds me of like Mennonite or Amish kind of text, where it's kind of like, man, you can just almost see the horses and buggies, like when you're reading that stuff. It's like, it's interesting. It talks about like courting and like, different sort of like environments where you would go out with your friends and stuff, and like why it's not the best for like youth to be alone, and how you should have like the sacred circle as your home, and with like healthy relationships between family members, and why the wife should do this thing or the kids should do these things, and the husband should be this way. It talks about like financial stability and maybe not buying too many things and not getting into debt, and living like a humble kind of lifestyle simplistically. It talks about all sorts of different topics. For me, it's more the details. When it starts getting into certain details, I was like, I don't know. But I mean, overall, I kind of like the topics that it touches on, and I kind of like that it tries to guide like, okay, like these things are healthier than what's going on in mainstream American culture. But it is a very American denomination, and it came in, from like 1844. So, people have heard about the Great Disappointment, October 22nd of 1844. The religion came out of that. So, it's not that old of a denomination, honestly, but it is pretty different. But the main focus that's different with Adventism is the focus on, trying to live healthy. It's like the health message that comes across in Adventism. You don't really see that push so much at other churches. Yeah, they're going to tell you, what to do, to, have a good spiritual life and everything and social interactions, but they don't usually talk too detailed on, what you should eat, what you should, all like the days you should take off and stuff like that. But Adventists do take it to another level. It's not just like recommended. It's like, we are doing this, and people kind of hold you accountable too. In a judgmental way. I mean, let's be real. Like, it's not like they're holding you accountable, being like, oh, like, hey, step aside, brother, let me talk to you about this. It's kind of just like, oh, I see you're eating some bacon over there. Like, it's kind of like, all right, dude, like, mind your own business. But it's kind of funny though, because it's like all the stuff that people get on each other about is stuff that everybody's doing anyways. And so there's just this, I don't want to call it hypocritical, but it's definitely judgmental, and definitely just like, let's look at the speck in everybody's eye while I got a log sticking out over here. Like, it's definitely, that verse definitely speaks to that. But it's not all negative, but there is a lot of room for judgment and not a lot of room for acceptance and being open about things, because you're so used to being so like, oh, if I'm struggling with something, you kind of learn early on that like the church is not the place to really let people know that you're having struggles with things. And if they find out, then they will prayerfully try to help you by praying gossiply and gossip to like everybody about what you're doing. It's like, like I've had friends that, were, getting into prostitution or drugs or, having premarital sex, having kids and things like that. And, of course, people didn't keep their mouths shut about it, and everybody knew because people were talking. So it was, like I would know because they were like my friends, but I would never really like say anything. But then, eventually like so many people would know. And I'm like, how do you know if I know it was just me and these 3 other people who knew, and maybe that person's parents? You kind of think, okay, your parent isn't going to throw you under the bus, so somebody told, one of the friends told, so it's kind of like there would be a lot of that going on, and a lot of just like, people always asking about other people, how's this person, how's so-and-so, and like I heard this and this and that about them, like they try to like act like they care, but then it was, to me, that's just not healthy. Like I'm just like, like I've started having to tell people, if you want to, know how they're doing, I can give you their number, or back then like their email address or Facebook or whatever. Like I can give you their contact information and you can ask them yourself, and most of the time people would never reach out to somebody else. And so that was just something that I found interesting, that was just like, oh gosh, like here we go. But yeah, so there was that. But I would say, so I say all that to say that, I'd say maybe this year, last year, I started, getting into a job that was finally like less stressful. So I started, getting more interested in like spiritual things again. Not necessarily Adventist things, but I would say, I really found the Hollywood Adventist Church in LA, not the Florida one. Not that I don't know the Florida one. I'm just saying there is one in Florida, and that's not the one I'm talking about. The one in LA, I started getting more attached to it, or more interested in it, just because it was something familiar, but they're more open-minded. I've mentioned before, they have like trans people that are, in their congregation and that are part of the service, and they don't like hold people back based on like their ethnicity or their, their gender or their sexual identity or their gender identity or their age or, their, beliefs or their cultural backgrounds or, their financial status. They don't really play favorites. I notice a lot of churches kind of tend to value like education, like who's a doctor, who's a nurse, who finished school and got these degrees, or who did, I don't know. It's a bunch of stuff about like who, like where you went to school. Did you go to an Adventist university? Are you a theology major? Different things that you start seeing that were like, that were not really seen by not everybody would meet that criteria, right? And so they kind of like would kind of choose favorites. It was like, if you come to church a lot and you pay your tithes and you do this and do that, then like you kind of are asked to do more things because you're already doing more things. And then I remember I would do like praise teams on occasion and stuff. Like they would have me organizing it, and I remember I would just call up anybody who would want to do it. I was like, I don't care if you come here that much or not. Like if I know that you could probably get here and get to practice and, whatever, and get to church, and you seem like you're interested in singing, I'm going to call you up and get you on there. And, I got people talking to me about it. They were like, maybe you shouldn't invite certain people. And I'm like, hey, I don't really care. If they want to do it, I'm going to make sure they get to do it. So I didn't really want to like exclude anybody, but I could tell that they had like a standard for like exclusion, and that just wasn't something that interested me. I was like, why? I tried to be friends with like everybody at that church. Not that I was like close friends with everybody, but I tried to be like, good with everybody there. Like, it was never my intention to be like a jerk or a gossipy kind of like scandalous kind of person. Like, I've got my own crap that I deal with, and I'm like, let me just work on myself. Like, I got my own stuff that I got to deal with. I don't have energy to be trying to deal with other people, act like their problems are my problems, and let me try to like focus on their issues. Like, yeah, I want to be supportive and be there for people if that's what they want, but I don't want to be like, spreading all the good news about their whole life. If it's really not good news, I don't really want to be sharing it and spreading it to everybody. I had a rabbi friend who would say that's an infection. Like, it's an infection. I'm like, yes, it is. That's exactly, it's a freaking infection. But that's kind of how I would describe, just in general, up until recently, kind of my Adventist experience, if you will. Like, on here, like, most of it's just like podcasting. I don't tend to really say like how I identify with like any denominations or religions. I'm perfectly fine not really like saying like, oh, I'm this or I'm that or whatever. I'm perfectly fine just living my life, but I know sometimes people need to feel that they're connected to people, but I feel like sometimes it's just my own opinion that sometimes, talking about a denomination and from like that denomination's traditional perspective kind of excludes a lot of people, because it's very preachy. I'm not really here to be like telling people what they should or shouldn't believe. I just like talking about like, it's called like theory and theology because that's what I like to talk about. It's just like theories and theologies and different sorts of traditions that kind of like you see it in the social cultural aspect of of a denomination. Especially, the cool part about Adventism is that it's such a social denomination, and it's so like I was saying, like, you interact often, and especially if you're pretty involved, you're interacting very often. Like, I knew people who, outside of church at all, like, who weren't even Adventists, who weren't like, anything growing up. A lot of them, they had friends and stuff, but there aren't that many people that you meet that can say, yeah, I've known these people since I was a kid, like a young kid, since I was like 5 or whatever, and like our families are still in touch and they're still friends, and like, maybe they're not like besties or, they don't talk to each other every day or anything, but it's like there's still like a sense of community. And I feel like in a big city, you don't really get that as much as you would. Maybe it's almost like equivalent to growing up in a small town where it's like people know each other, they grew up together, they spend a lot of time together, people have their roles and their status and stuff like that, which, like, I'm not saying that I believe in all that, but that's just kind of how things socially would unfold. And people would allow it because that was like acceptable according to like, nobody would ever really say that it's not okay. I think Genesis Church was the first church where I ever went where there's a pastor that came up and spoke and was just like, it is not okay for people to be talking crap about people. It is not okay for you to be up on Facebook just like blasting people and like talking crap and all this kind of stuff. It's like, if you're part of this church and you're part of this church family, I will come up here every time and I will tell you that it's not okay. Like, they're not going to kick people out and stuff, but they were like, it's not okay, and so they addressed it in a very mature way, I thought, and I wish that more churches would do that. I hope more churches do. I don't really know if they will, but yeah, that was kind of just how how I kind of, I don't want to say evolved in a way to like make it sound like it's better, but I mean, that's kind of how things like unfolded in my life up until near this point where I'm at now. But this is getting lengthy and I didn't think it was going to take that long to explain the background of things. I kind of went way more in depth with it than I thought I would. So, I don't know. Whenever I start talking about Adventism, I get a little venty about it. So, yeah, so I would say the next part, I'll talk more about, like, prayer and spirituality and kind of like the more, kind of more like tangible things. I don't even know if they're really tangible because it's like, to me, it doesn't make any sense. Like, it doesn't make any sense. And the reason why I say that is because I'm the least religiously involved than I've ever probably been in my life, in a weird way. Like, I'm not like too involved in like an organized religion. Like, there are things that I dabble with that I kind of like think that I should be doing, like paying tithe and, like, as far as the services are concerned, like going into a service, I don't really go to a regular service where I'm like trying to interact and socialize with others. I don't really do that for like quite a few years now. Like, I go to church when I feel like it, but usually I feel like I'd rather spend that time by myself and not really interact, because I have such a social job where it's like, I'm talking to people all the time, and I really value my time by myself a lot. I don't really want to be burdened by other people's problems sometimes. Like, I'm very picky. Like, I have friends that I'm like, friends and family that I'm like, or friends that are family that I'm just like, these people I prioritize in my life. If they try to call me, I'll try to pick up, unless I really just can't. If I'm just like, sometimes I'm just going through it, and I know that I'm not going to be of any use to anybody anyways. It's like, sometimes I'm just like, I need to do what I need, kind of like they say in the airplane, like, put the mask on yourself before you try to like help other people put theirs on. You don't want to all be suffocating together. Like, and so, on occasion I am kind of in a phase like that, more so lately than before. But, I think stepping outside of the mainstream religion has actually helped me to kind of see things with my eyes and experience and witness things in life without relying on so much focus on like the words and like, oh, this word was changed to this in like the 1600s, and that's why this tradition is that way, and all the like text and detail of the letter, and debating about like what's changed and all this kind of thing. And I probably didn't mention that I used to go to this group called Teen Rap, where like we would it was almost like a debate style with like Bible topics. Like, the youth pastor did like a debate style of things, and so yeah, so there's that. But yeah, I would say that the side that I'm kind of more on lately is more like just trying to observe and keep my eyes open, and getting kind of a bit out of the intellectual part of my brain with like religion and spiritual things, and getting kind of out of like the traditions that I was kind of raised with. Not that they're bad. I feel like I'm kind of taking in more of the stuff that I never really, like, I'm kind of taking in the stuff that I notice is valuable to me, that I feel like, okay, I'm kind of almost called in my life to kind of try to like gel with, like, I can gel with this, there's certain stuff, not everything, but there's certain stuff like, trying to be, a little more Sabbath observant, a little more. Like, I'm still gonna go out, like, I'm not gonna avoid that really, but I mean, trying to, if I feel like it's something I feel like I need to do for myself, then yes, I'll try to do it, and try to be more in tune with kind of like what I learned in, my upbringing, and like through being involved in a church for so long that's so detailed and everything about like every aspect of how it could benefit your life, trying to take out the beneficial parts that I notice are beneficial to me and that I find beneficial to me, and that I feel called to do. And if I feel burdened by it, I usually don't push too much. But for me, there is like a fine line between like feeling burdened by something but feeling like I need to do it versus pushing myself to do it. It's kind of like almost kind of the same relationship I have with like working out, like especially when I'm doing like exercise routines where I'm not like playing sports with friends or like hiking or at the beach or something, but I'm just like in my bedroom just working out to work out, just working out because I know it's like a healthy thing to do. I'd say that is almost equivalent sometimes, where it's like I know I need to do this but I really don't feel like it, I'm not motivated to do it, but sometimes I'll just do it. So that's kind of how I feel about that. Those kind of like traditional things, sometimes it's like sometimes I know that that's what my mind and body is like saying, like you need to do this because you'll feel better, because it'll help you, versus like I really just don't want to do this and it's not going to make a difference if I do or not. Like, so when I kind of have that kind of mode where it's like I really just don't want to do something, I just kind of don't do it, and that's just where I am at with things, and I feel like for me that's just better. I push in other things. There are some things that I'm trying to push with lately that are a lot harder to push on than like, not eating pork or keeping the Sabbath and that kind of stuff. Like, it's just stuff that's more kind of based on kind of like I was saying, like tangible, like spirituality, more spiritual based, not so much religious and doctrine based, but more like kind of like what am I noticing in the world around me. So I'll get into that next. I'm not really gonna spend I think I'm trying to see if I've kind of like gotten it all out of my system because I don't want to record a whole additional clip about this again. But I think I've brought things up to speed with like the background of kind of where I'm coming from and kind of how things have changed in my life in general, like with the religious stuff, like since childhood probably up until like now. Let me get into talking about like some of the, like I was saying, the more tangible stuff that's kind of a lot more based on what I actually want to talk about, because we're just over an hour now. So all right, and thanks for listening.